One thing really unique here in Breckenridge is regardless if you're driving from the south or the north, as you drive into the valley and drive into town, you cannot not notice the High Alpine terrain. It's so prominent along the 10-mile range, and it's such an integral part of the ski resort. It's just something that you don't fully understand until you experience for yourself.
I think something for me that's important in my life, just to be there.
It's a very spiritual place, and the experience you can have up there is really unique.
Get to the top of the ridge and just be like, oh my God, like this is real terrain up here. This is real skiing.
You go up there and stand off the edge there and you go, ooh.
You're really just dropping off the edge into nowhere.
To be considered high alpine, you have to be above the tree line. You can imagine how the environment changes when there's no forest or pine trees or anything, and it really creates an entirely new dynamic.
We would hike up and started skiing different stuff in the lake chutes depending on how gnarly it was. You had to be a little bit of a die-hard to do it.
We had several accidents early on with cornices breaking.
You get a lot of respect for what you're dealing with. It's nature. As soon as you think you got it figured out, you don't.
It takes years and years to make something like this happen.
The High Alpine here is so accessible.
There's so much incredible terrain.
You can find your solitude. You can kind of get away from people.
You just get opened up to a whole nother dimension. It just makes Breck just a little more gnarlier, which in my eyes makes it a little better.
Well, the early days, we stopped the lifts at Timberline, pretty much, because it was quite windy up above.
When the mountain first was created in 1961, they said stay away from the High Alpine because there's too much avalanche danger.
Back in the day, I mean, the ski resort was so small, and then like we would always just look up at Imperial Bowl and it was out of bounds. You know, and you would be like, wow, that looks just awesome to ski.
You know, the evolution of being able to actually start to be able to hike to some of these areas, I think there were a lot of people that were really excited about it.
The 70s and 80s are a wild time. There was a lot of characters. And a lot of what we called, you know, free skiing, just out there exploring.
You always hear about like people accessing the stuff before the public kind of gets it, and they christen it, and they see the potential as to what it is, and that's, I mean, I respect that more than anything.
TJ Miller and Rick Asher, Trigby, those guys are all have been skiing up there in some of that terrain that wasn't open before for years. They were sort of the forefathers of it. Yeah, the stories of them skiing lake chutes before it was accessible by Imperial Chair and before it was controlled for avalanches, and just jumping off a 30-foot head wall.
There weren't any rules. It was a few hundred ski bums ripping it up every day, having a riot. The cast of characters go far and wide. You know, I skied a lot with Randy Wieneman, guys like CJ and Wacky Tim and Banana Man, and we had a lot of fun back then.
Definitely know CJ really well. He was, still is, ski bum that you would call it. He would work all summer so he could ski all winter, and that's what he still does.
This is my first season pass. When I moved up to Breckenridge, it was very small, and there was already a guy in town named John. So about halfway through the first season, they decided that I could be called Crazy John because all we did was go looking for jumps.
There's a lot of buddies that we would race, and we would go bump skiing, and we'd go hiking, and just live that ski bum life, and it was magical. It's just such a great moment in a snippet of time.
Before the T-bar was put in, we would hike up from the B50. Sometimes we'd hike up just a little ways and we'd traverse over into what's now Peak 7 Vertigo, and sometimes we'd hike all the way up to the summit and ski down from there depending on the wind and the snow conditions. I still have just a vivid memory of the day that my roommate Larry Hardy, we called him Larry the Lump, he and I hiked up and skied it, came back down, and it was so good we decided we were going to do it again. Larry was going to come down and get the movie camera, and I bumped into 2 other friends, and those were the only 6 tracks on the summit of Peak 8 and Vertigo and Debbie's Alley the whole day. It was very memorable and really a fun time.
When I started here, we had a pommel lift that accessed Horseshoe Bowl, which kind of got us, our foot in the door to the High Alpine. And after a few years working here, they put a T-bar on.
People were up, exploring, enjoying what the High Alpine had to offer. And I think Breck was really a pioneer in developing high alpine terrain. Believe it or not, the T-bar, which has been around for a long time, was a pretty innovative and revolutionary lift installation. And it gave people access to high alpine and truly high alpine.
We started hiking up to the summit of Peak 8. And so we started skiing over, and the first run past Imperial now is called Easy Street, and we named it Easy Street because it was very easy to get into. When you came off the summit and came down, that's where the cornice was the smallest.
A lot of these names from the high country come from patrollers who were the first ones down that trail.
CJ's is off of Peak 7, and it's named after C.J. Mueller.
Those kinds of people, I think, are deserving of having a little memory of what they've done. And in his own way, he was a huge part of our ski area, too.
In the front bowl, there's one called Brill's Thrill that is named after Dwight Brill, who was a longtime snowmaker here and groomer and succumbed to cancer. To be in there and think about Dwight, I think for a lot of us that work here, it takes on a different connotation of, it's a remembrance of somebody who worked here for a long time and committed a lot of their life to working here. The High Alpine, I think that is fun, it's always challenging, but it was a dangerous area to even think about, consider even going into.
We'd had a pretty tragic accident up there in '87.
Right up the T-bar, you could traverse past the area boundary and traverse across to Peak 7. Well, that ended up being a kind of a disaster that year, that they had guys traversing from down lower, and 2 guys hiked up higher and kicked off an avalanche that killed guys that were traversing in from lower.
I think it helps you gain a lot of respect also for what you're dealing with and what you might put yourself into, and how, what a major avalanche can do and the impact.
So the ski area and the Forest Service decided they needed to, if people were going to ski it, they needed to take it over and control it, and that's exactly what happened eventually.
This is where the exploration came from, was that opportunity to see what else is possible out there. So we started to actually take it on and look at it and how could we control that. And to actually bring that to fruition, it takes time.
My vision at one time, or in the beginning, was to develop all the peaks all the way to Frisco.
So many different entities have to come together and work in unison. We have to think about hydrology, we have to think about wildlife, we have to think about botany, we have to think about the effects that it may have on the community by expanding and growing.
Late 80s, we started kind of looking at Imperial, and we decided that that was something that we could do. Obviously, there was no lift up there, so it was all hike to, and it made getting up there a little more difficult on a daily basis.
I think there were a lot of people that were really excited about it, but there's a lot of people that used to skin out to that area, out through the gate. That was their own private nirvana.
It was definitely like a bittersweet process to have that access change from sort of this kind of hidden secret gem into a more public accessed area, but truly, I think the access you have now is just so much more diverse.
It really made a transition of our resort to really emulate a lot of the gigantic ski areas that you see in Europe, where it's this huge, vast expanses of high alpine terrain. It really set that bar at a high level that you just don't find out in Colorado, or really even the West. I remember one day I walked in the boss's office and I said, "Rick, we need to lift to the top. That's all there is to it. I'm getting tired of hiking."
One of the things I thought was truly amazing was the development and installation of the Imperial lift. There were a lot of naysayers who thought it couldn't be done. You know, it is the highest chairlift in North America.
The Imperial Chair was really a bar that we set really high. And I grabbed the lift manager at that time, John Mock, and we went up to the mountain and we literally drove a nail where we said, all right, we're gonna load here and we're gonna unload here. Lift towers were dug by hand. We flew an excavator to the top to construct the top terminal, and lo and behold, by the end of that summer going into winter, the lift was done. John and I were up there and we found the nail that we had put in the snow 6 months earlier before we started the excavation. So it was an ebb and flow of emotions going on at that same time, and a lot of work put in with planning efforts and our community partners to get that to come together.
The Imperial Chair was definitely a game changer. Instead of hiking from the T-bar, which was long and a big commitment, you know, a half-day commitment, you can now just hop off the lift, grab your board or skis, and hike 10 or 15 minutes. You get the experience up there as if you hiked a 13,000-foot mountain. You're just standing there on top of the world.
That whole side of the mountain wasn't there before, and now that's been all worked on, and there's chairlifts and access to there, so it's pretty incredible.
Opened up the capability to take Breckenridge to a different level because of what that terrain had to offer in terms of degree of difficulty and the whole intensity of the whole thing.
As the high alpine terrain has developed over these many years with Imperial Chair and over to Peak 7 and the Hike 2 terrain, and then really the culmination to a large degree is Peak 6.
I used to skin up Peak 6 and go out into what they call the senses now and just ski those lines and skin back up, and it was out of the gate, but that was the only way to really access that terrain.
The confidence that we had in developing something we were very comfortable knowing that we could control from an avalanche standpoint, control from an operational standpoint. We knew going in that this was just going to be another enhancement to an already awesome portfolio of high alpine terrain.
I was a part of the building of Peak 6, which was the highlight of my career. I was in charge of the logging, and when we were up there hiking around up in the Six Senses and stuff, we were just like, this is going to be so awesome, and it really is.
We went out there for 4 or 5 years looking at stuff, and the year we opened it, it was kind of like a whole new ball game. It was for real.
First lift serve run down Peak 6 was myself and Pat and Gary and a couple of other folks, and it was just so special. It's kind of emotional, actually. It was after the blood, sweat, and tears of everything we put into that. To go down and knee-deep powder that first day, man, that was pretty cool. That's as good as it gets right there.
Big goal of the Peak 6 project was providing a high alpine experience for more than just experts. And I had an incredible day. It was a year or so after we'd opened Peak 6, and I was standing in the lift line at Peak 7 one day. And a family was standing in front of me. And the little girl, who looked to be about 7 years old, looked up her dad and said, "Dad, I love Peak 6." And it was just an amazing moment for me to have realized the experience that we really were hoping for, and to see families, kids of all levels out there enjoying it.
When you go out there to Peak 6 and you see all that terrain, the first thought is am I still on Breck? Get to the top of the ridge and just be like, oh my God, this is real terrain up here. This is real skiing.
Snow safety work, and the reality always comes back to you that you can never let your guard down. You can't get complacent. It's nature, and as soon as you think you got it figured out, you don't.
The control work, to make it possible, out there ski cutting, throwing bombs.
So the purpose of doing our avalanche control work when we get snow and wind here, which we get a lot of wind, which is, a lot of people don't like the wind, but it's actually what makes the skiing and alpine so good here. So the purpose of going on an avalanche control route with explosives is to test the new snow loads that we get. And we don't always produce an avalanche, but we always test it to make sure that our forecast is right. Most of it's done with hand charges. They generally weigh about 3 pounds, and so you approach from a safe spot, you throw it over the edge into the avalanche path.
Just dealing with that snow year after year after year, we began to get a little better of understanding of how the different weather patterns, different snowpacks can affect it. Our forecasting of avalanches got better, our education got a little better. And if we didn't like something, we just threw a bigger explosive charge at it and see what happened. It's extremely hard work. You spend most of the time up there. The weather's pretty inclement, but you got to stick with it. So it's not for everybody. I think it takes a person that is passionate about it, loves the snow, and wants to continue to learn about how snow changes and the kind of internal dynamics that take place.
The development of the High Alpine area has been incredible since I moved here. It's been so much fun, and I started out as a park skier, and now as I'm developing my skiing, every day can't be a park day. So you can go out and explore the High Alpine, get above that tree line, and really find some lines that people haven't hit. Great cliffs and chutes, you get all your little secret areas, and it's just really fun, and every single person you run into has a new spot that you never even knew about. It's just unlimited terrain, and you can just find a million different cool things to do.
I've got quite a few favorite spots. Some of them I cannot mention here in good conscience. I wouldn't feel good about selling my buddies out. Contest is really fun. A few fun rocks to drop off of. Yeah, Horseshoe overall is a really fun area.
Go down to Horseshoe, go to Contest. It just kind of opens up with that really playful terrain. That's seriously my all-time favorite run, lift, ever, of anywhere I've been in the world. Like, that just feels like home to me.
I think probably my favorite run, I would say it's probably CJ's, and it's the longest, most sustained vertical. It's probably 1,200 vertical feet of just this beautiful pitch.
There's so many good shots up there from the top of Peak 7. Areas like Vertigo, White Chute, CJ's, Magic Carpet Ride. The experience of being able to go up there and ski some of those extended lines or those really challenging shots. It's probably why a lot of people, work at Breck and probably stick around.
I think that when you get into the front bowls, when you get in Peak 7 and looking down at the Independence lift down below, and then when there's nobody else around and you get that feeling of just kind of that silence, and then it gets so quiet and then you kind of hear that little bit of that lift running down below, but looking down at the town, it's really amazing. There's just something for me, and I think it's probably true for a lot of people, about being above timberline. I love riding up and looking across the ridge at La Plata Peak and Mount Elbert, which is the highest in the state. And then you get off the lift and you can turn around and see Pikes Peak off in the distance, which is the most iconic peak in all of Colorado. And you can see them both.
It's so expansive. You can feel like you're in a different part of the ski area when you're up there. And maybe that's what it is. It's a good place to just get away.
There's days where my brother and I would bring my dad up there, and you kind of just see his eyes light up like, oh man, like, what did these guys get me into, We'll cruise and we'll see him just kind of working his way down the run. But then again, like, he makes it down, and then just the smile on his face is like, whoa, that was like some real stuff. Seeing someone get a little challenged and a little out of their comfort zone is really cool too.
Breckenridge has such phenomenal terrain. All the peaks, really, whether you're going to hike up from Peak 10 or Peak 9 up higher, or ride up and ski it off of Peak 8 or Peak 6. When you get there on those special days, when it's just right, it's something you'll never forget. Even on the days when it's a little more challenging, a little more crowded, wind blown or the snow isn't great, it still is just a great experience and a great place to be. I would be happy if every day of my life if I could ride up the Imperial Chair once a day.